Friends, welcome to another episode of Making Disciples. I'm so pleased that you are here with me today. This episode is going to be a chat with a friend of mine, Cathy Madavan. She's been on the podcast before. She's a writer, she's a speaker, she's a great friend of mine. And we're going to be talking about how to cope with disappointments, particularly in light of this second lockdown that we've got with COVID. And we're going to be talking a little bit about how to care for ourselves in this crisis that we are in. So I hope you find this really helpful. She's an inspiring person. She has such a great testimony of how God has worked with her and through disappointment in her and her family's life. So she's credible and she really loves the Lord. So I hope you find this episode with Cathy inspiring and really joyful. Cathy Madavan, welcome back to Making Disciples. You are the only individual that's made it onto the podcast 3 times.
Oh my gosh.
This is the 67th episode and you've made it on 3 times. Nobody else has done that. So thank you.
All the best things are trilogies, aren't they? Toy Story and I'm trying to think of other film trilogies now. But yeah, great.
Sequels are bad. Speed 2, awful. Tremors 2, awful. Sister Act 2, awful. But the third one is always good.
I don't even know how many Star Wars films there are, but you can tell me, so...
Oh, there's more than 3.
Yeah, okay.
Cathy, I love talking with you because you are very honest. You're a disciple of Jesus. It's very honest. You don't give the Christian platitudes. Some church leaders are very good at spieling out Bible passages. You are just very honest. You're riddled with Jesus, but you're very honest. How are you coping? We're now in this lockdown version 2. How are you doing?
Oh, thanks for that, Chris. I think I've received enough Christian platitudes over the year to put me off for life. So it is good to be authentic, isn't it? And to be real and to be, just genuine, because I don't think God requires from us that we have some impressive glossy answer to all the stuff that's going on at the moment. And it has been a hard year. I think it's been a lot of disappointment in our family, actually. Our daughter graduated and her job kind of got deferred by 2 years. Our other daughter went to university and was effectively locked in a room. And then, for Mark and I, he's a church leader and we were due to have a sabbatical and to be away. And instead of that, he's had to spend the year, like every church leader, adapting like crazy. And as an itinerant in ministry, my work basically disappeared overnight. So, it's definitely been a year of adaptation. It's been tough. And going into this lockdown again, it's a bit like, oh my gosh. But you just, you're not alone. And there are people everywhere facing these different challenges. And we are really in it together, aren't we?
I think that's one of the passages that I found really helpful is from Paul when he says, run the race to get the prize. And we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. And I love that idea as running this race in this pandemic. And we're not running a 100-meter. We're not running a 1,000-meter. We're running a marathon. And this year feels like a marathon. Therefore, we're changing our pace. We're going a little bit slower. We're changing what feeds us. But yet we are surrounded by people. And I love it. He's actually talking about Abraham and Isaac and Esther and Ruth and, Mary. And he's talking about all these incredible biblical characters. But also we have a great cloud of witnesses around us that are friends cheering us on. I think that's one of the things I found the most helpful. Messages from friends just saying, how are you doing? Cheering you on, doing a great job. I think we need that, don't we? We need to have people around us who are cheering us on.
Yeah, I really, really agree with that. I found it really interesting. I was doing a bit of research for a book earlier in the year, and I was thinking about the word courage, and it's from the French word. It's courage is cœur, which means heart. So to be courageous is to be able to take heart. And I love the fact that there are these 2 prefixes to the word courage. There's encourage, which is to give you courage, and there's discourage, which is to remove courage. And I think in this incredibly difficult time where so much resilience is required, we have the power to discourage, to remove courage from people around us, or we have the possibility of encouraging, of giving them courage. And I think there is an epidemic, you know, a shortage of encouragement at the moment. We need, rather than just comparing and contrasting what our workplaces, what our churches, what our leaders, what our preachers, what our friends are doing online, and just critiquing, we just got to get into that place where we find the good and offer encouragement. Because I tell you, the discouragement is coming thick and fast, and you almost have to counteract it with more encouragement than discouragement if you're going to keep any courage in the bank. Do you know what I mean?
I have had to really, so you will not see me, generally anyway, but you will not see me, particularly at the moment, placing anything on there criticising the government, criticising healthcare, criticising friends, criticising theology. I have said to my congregation, let's make our Instagrams, our Twitters, our Facebooks, just positive stuff, creative stuff, cheering stuff, because I'm on a bunch of evangelical church leader kind of Facebook groups, and my Lord, I've had to silence those conversations because I just think it's the most unhelpful. People going on watching other church leaders' sermons. I'm like, please don't watch mine. I like a good bit of heresy. You know, one generation's heresy is the next generation's saint. That's not true. But yeah, we want to put we need to put some positivity back in. And I think that's the biblical, what do we see Christ doing in the Sermon on the Mount? Yes, there's teaching.
And what do we see Paul doing? Like Paul, who I mean, you already referred to, who so much of the New Testament is written from in less than ideal situations. All of those captivity letters where he is in less than ideal circumstances, not plan A, not plan B, probably not even plan C. And yet you see him saying all the time, and yet the disciples are being bolder, and yet the gospel is going into the heart of the Roman Empire, and yet, and it's kind of almost like, well, and I'm not advocating kind of blind denial and just pretending everything's fine and put on your happy face and positive thinking. But what I'm saying is, where there are things to be affirmed, where there are things to be encouraged, where there are things to highlight that are good, not to deny the challenges, because they are real and that's important to acknowledge. But there are things to affirm. And I think public is good, but I also think just private texts of encouragement and saying, you know, thanks for that sermon. I know so many church leaders are working for hours and hours and hours at home and maybe get one text of encouragement on a Sunday. It's like, come on, we can just say thank you for stuff. We can be positive. And not just that, the teachers, the doctors, the nurses, the people we know who are just doing a good thing right now, looking after their kids, whatever it is. Let's just be positive if we can, really, because we need it, don't we? I know I do.
Can we just talk about Paul for a moment then? So I'd love to just read from 2 Corinthians 4. And it's a verse that has been on my mind in previous weeks. It says this from 2 Corinthians 4:7. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that his all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but we are not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our bodies. I love that. Crushed, battered, bruised, isolated, but yet Christ is still doing something amazing. How do we, Cathy, what does that look like in our everyday life? And how do we make sure that we don't allow things to crush us? How do we know, Christ is the one that is holding us and supporting us?
Well, I mean, you probably know this, but you've picked my favourite verses in the entire Bible, and it's what a couple of my books are based around. So it's my favourite verse. There's a Message version that says, it says struck down but not destroyed. I think the Message says you are knocked down but not knocked out, which I just love, and it goes on to say, and because of this, because we have this treasure in jars of clay, we do not lose heart. our outer self might be wearing away, but our inner self's being renewed day by day. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. And I just think for this season, 2 Corinthians 4 is just the most incredible passage on resilience, on knowing where our hope is found. You know, somewhere else in the Bible, in Proverbs or Psalms, where is it? I can't remember. It says that hope deferred makes the heart sick. And I think we have had so much hope deferred in this season. We've had so much disappointment. But I think the reason is often that our hope is in our jars. It's in like the exterior stuff. It's in our circumstances, in our success, in our identity that's built up in our workplace or in our role or in our income or whatever it is. And so we focus on our jars, we compare jars, we show other people how fabulous our jars are. But this passage just says, actually, your jar's made of clay. It's fragile, it gets broken, it gets cracked. But actually the treasure, the hope, is in Jesus. So if our hope is in the treasure in the jar, then we won't have our hope as easily deferred. It won't be as easily disappointed if we're putting our hope in the right thing. And this is a time of stripping away, isn't it, where some of that stuff that we present to the world, that we present to ourselves, and maybe we even present to God, like some of that stuff is being stripped away, and we're back to looking at what we really treasure. Like, what do we really value? What do we really care about? And our hope won't be as deferred if we can find the riches in that. I think that would be my hunch.
I love that. I try to untangle. Paul is very tangled, isn't he? The way Paul writes is quite tangled up. I try to untangle it. So I've tried to pull it out. So it's the passage essentially says, when we are hard pressed, confused, and persecuted, it says that Jesus says that we are not crushed, not in despair, and we're not abandoned. I love that. When we're pressed, confused, and persecuted, because of Christ in us, we are not crushed, we're not in despair, and we're not abandoned. And I think it's really important that abandoned. Beautiful. We're not abandoned. Even though our jars are cracked, even though our mental health may be cracked, even though we're fraying at the edges. I was honest with you before we went live that last night we did church on Zoom, and about 20 minutes before we did the Zoom service, I'm running around tidying my study and unpacking things out of camera's sight, so at least my study looked. You know, we want to present I'm doing all right, but yet our homes are in chaos right now. But what we're seeing on the camera looks really pristine. And we are being stretched emotionally, mentally, physically. We are being crushed, but I love that promise that we are not abandoned. Christ has not abandoned his church. Christ has not abandoned his people.
We've got to get our head around that theology, haven't we, Chris? Because I think we've got a really good theology often of miracles and moments, but we don't often have a great theology of process and of suffering and of perseverance and endurance. And yet the Bible is packed full of stories, full about perseverance and endurance. It's a very, very biblical theme. So sometimes, because we haven't really grappled with this theology, we feel that if life is bad, that must mean that God is bad, or that maybe we failed. Maybe we've been told that we don't have enough faith, that we haven't prayed hard enough, or we've been given a theology that says that God, is like a kind of like provision box in the sky who answers all your prayers when you ask him, with lots of proof text to prove it. And actually the reality is that we haven't fallen off God's agenda or failed in our faith. If life is challenging, we are just part of the human existence that has always been that case throughout history, and definitely throughout the entire Bible. We are joining with saints who've had to discover, as Paul did, Christ in us, the hope of glory. To live is Christ, but to die is gain. To know him in his sufferings, it's quite a sacred thing to invite God into the messiness and go, I need you here. Like, I can't do this on my own. On my own, I will just crack. But if actually I can do this with you, I know there is hope. I will get through this, and I might even get through this stronger, in the sense that I'll know you more. my problems might not all go away, it might not all be fixed, but if I come out of this knowing my creator better, if I come out of this with a deeper sense of humility and dependence and empathy with others going through stuff, then that would be amazing, and God would be glorified, and that's got to be our goal, I think, as disciples.
I've seen two things happen during this last 7-8 months with Christians. I'll talk about my church in East London. We've seen those who have fallen into fear. The danger with fear is we make God too small. The other crew have fallen into being superheroes. Because I've got Jesus, I can't get COVID. I don't need to wear a mask. And this inflated, not God, it's not that they're making God bigger. It feels like they're making themselves bigger. I don't have to care about this stuff because I'm immune, because Jesus makes me immune. Actually, both of them are poor theology. Christ says there's no need to fear, whilst at the same time also says there will be persecutions and hard times that will come. There's a middle road of resilience where we hold our fears and we hold ourselves in Christ. And so I want to ask you just around, how do we keep on going when life is tough? What are the tips that you have for staying in that place where we're trusting Jesus, we're holding on to him, but yet we are being battered and hard pressed on every side? How do we keep going?
Well, I just really resonate with what you've said there. I think we've identified red, amber and green people, and and they have exactly, as you've said, really, and that nuance in the middle. Often as a leader, you're kind of the amber person in the middle, basically annoying everyone. Telling the red people, come on, we can do this, telling the green people to just maybe tone it down a bit. But yeah, I resonate with that. And in both Irrepressible and Digging for Diamonds, my two books, this is the kind of stuff that I dig into quite a lot about resilience. Irrepressible, less stuff about faith. Digging for Diamonds, more about faith. But they are both, in a sense, coming back to the truth that we are an accumulation of what we believe and our habits, how we practice our beliefs. So we're both we're our orthodoxy, we're what we believe, but we're actually our praxis as well. We're what we do as well as what we believe. And I think sometimes we have to come back to we have to come back to the theology, what we believe, if we want it to influence what we do. And so I would say a lot of resilience in this season has to be digging a bit deeper into our faith, turning up the volume on the Bible, putting those wonderful daily habits in of prayer and of contemplation, of reading, of just getting out into nature, whatever the ways are that you connect with God, in order for that to influence our practice. Sometimes we want to have a kind of transformation of what we do, but we haven't dug the foundations in order for that to happen. And I would just say, for one small, like really practical tip for me, is focusing on what I can do and not on what I can't do. There are so many things at the moment. Our limitations are galore, disappointment, as we've said. But there are things I can do. So what is the next right thing that I can do today? Like, what one thing? I love in Philippians, Paul talks about the stuff he's going through, but then he says, this one thing I do, fixing my eyes on Jesus, looking ahead, pressing on towards the goal. And I love the fact that Paul had said, well, this one thing I can do. There's all these things I can't do, but this one thing I can do. And is there one conversation we could have? Is there one daily habit that we could put in place? Is there one kind of like positive affirmation we could write on our mirror for the morning about God's love for us? Is there one person we could text today? Because there's so many things we can't do. But I think there is a sense, if we can get some agency in ourselves and remind ourselves that there are things that we can do today to show compassion to others, to show compassion to ourselves. There are things that they might be very small, and in another season it might not seem like a big win, but in this season it is, and so we just need to do that.
One of the things that I found really helpful in lockdown, because everything's been online, all of my meetings have been online, which means I've got evening meetings online. And the way Zoom finishes, you kind of go awkwardly, right, I'll go now, bye. What I've been doing on an evening is on my computer, I've got a card with night prayer on it. And it's just an Anglican tradition. Before the ending of the day, Creator of the world, we pray that you with steadfast love would keep your watch around us while we sleep. It's a beautiful prayer. And any of the evening meetings, I've said, right, I'm just going to lead us in night prayer before we go now. And I've loved it. And some of the guys that I've been on Zoom with, what the heck is, like, what is he losing it? Others have gone, oh my gosh, that was just, where did you get that from? Oh, it's just our church night prayer. Can I get that? Definitely. And I think, praying in the morning when I wake up has been a practice that I've done. Becky and I always pray before we go to sleep. But something in that late evening that just lands the day and says, right, I'm done now. Computer is off. I'm not going to think more about this. I'm off time. I found it really helpful. From evil dreams, defend our sight, from fears and terrors of the night. Tread underfoot our deadly foe, that we no sinful thought may know. O Father, that we ask be done through Jesus Christ, your only Son, and Holy Spirit, by whose breath our souls are raised to life from death. Oh, I love it. I'm not a poet.
It's wonderful.
For me, it's been the one thing that just ends the day really lovely when I've been
just a practice that's like, and does that just helps your brain shift from one gear to an. I love that.
We haven't got much longer left, but I want to ask you about your devotional that you have had come out this autumn, based on Digging for Diamonds, which is a cracking book, and it still is a cracking book. People haven't read Digging for Diamonds, then it is really worth getting hold of a copy. We've got about 3 on our church bookshelf because people have bought it, they've read it, and they wanted to lend it to others and put it on our bookshelf because they want others to read it. It's not because they've abandoned it. But you've created this devotional that kind of works alongside it. And one of the things I love, and it is about the way you write, but it's also about your character. You're amazing at seeing the diamonds in the dirt. You're very good at seeing things from a slightly different perspective, and you're amazing at cheering us on. So just give us the devotional that you've had out. Why did you write that? What was your thought behind writing it?
Well, it was really because Digging for Diamonds continues to be like such a catalyst in so many people's lives. I've been amazed. I've been humbled, actually. So, I get a message like every week at least from someone who's read Digging for Diamonds, and they've spoken about it in so many places. Those verses from 2 Corinthians feature strongly in it. And that whole thing about finding treasure in the messiness of life. And I do share some of our tough stuff that we've been through, some of the mess in our life. And I think people resonate with that, actually. I think they kind of like go, yeah, she's not just speaking theory, she's sharing her own stuff too. And so this devotional, it's actually completely new stuff. It's not rehashed old stuff from Digging for Diamonds, but we just thought we'd take the chapters and the themes from the original book, which seem to have resonated so well, and write a whole new, I say we, that would be me, write a whole new devotional.
The royal we.
Days. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we. That would be me, myself, and I thought we'd write a new book. And each day's just got like a Bible reading, some thoughts from me, and then some prayers or questions at the end that kind of like unearth or mine, if you like, a bit more treasure, a bit more of the riches from God's word, something hopefully that will be precious to people, helpful, valuable to people, as they kind of like unearth their own treasures in the messiness of their own life. So it's only a small little book, and it's literally 40 days of readings and reflections, really. And I hope people love it. I hope they enjoy it. But most of all, I hope it's helpful, because life is challenging. So the more stuff we can get into our brains and we can think about that will actually help us to focus on Jesus and move forwards in that is a good thing.
If I don't eat breakfast, I will always eat crisps, chocolate, biscuits at 11 o'clock. If I start the day with something wholesome, it sets me up well for the rest of the day. And essentially what you've created here, the length of it is really lovely. Bible passage and a thought and some things to think about. It's the kind of thing that if somebody gets out the shower, before they head downstairs, they could have this by the side of their bed, take it out a little thought that then you just ponder on that over breakfast, and it sets you up well for the day. Well, you know, I love, Paul talks about anchoring ourselves into the Holy of Holies and anchoring ourselves to the cross of Christ. What you're doing here is you're giving us some help. It's starting our day to anchor in with Jesus. There's a book that I have by Dietrich Bonhoeffer that is it's 365 days a year. And a few years ago, I did it and then I put it down. And a couple of years later, I came back and I did it again. And this is the kind of thing that you could do for 40 days, put it down for a few months, and then come back to, can't you? Because the truths within it
and
are...
also, there's questions at the end as well. And I often find with my books, because I always put questions at the end, because I think our most important learning isn't what we read, it's what we do with what we read. So I always put questions at the end of things. And I have a lot of people say they read through the first time, but then they go through a second time with a journal and they begin to really unpack those questions. And that's where the transformation begins to really, that really takes place. And I think you're right. I think my favorite books I've read over and over. I mean, you are what you eat, you know, like you said. And the trouble is we're discipling ourselves all the time through Netflix and through whatever, and then that's not all bad, and I don't mean to indicate it is, but we actually have to make sure that we are also nourishing ourselves with good stuff. Let's be very honest, we're very good at self-feeding on Netflix, but we expect our church leaders to feed us our spiritual stuff, and we've failed to step up and actually become self-feeders spiritually. So things like this are gifts to us because we need to learn to daily self-feed, not being a consumer, but being a disciple, a follower, which means taking some responsibility for ourselves. And that's why anything like this, I just think is a helpful gift for us as a church to self-feed. Well, and you've written so much stuff like this too, Chris, and you know, so many people have benefited from the Making Disciples stuff and this podcast. You know, I just think your faithfulness in that has been extraordinary, you know, and you've got a laser focus on helping to make disciples who make disciples, people who actually walk their own walk. And like you said, don't expect someone else to walk it for them. We're called to be followers, aren't we? Not just watchers or consumers. We're called to be followers. So I know we've both got a passion to follow alongside people, you know, to walk with people and to do whatever we can to help. Amen. Well, Cathy, please know that we'll be ordering some copies of this for our congregation. One of the things I'm doing at the moment is I'm trying to gift things to my congregation to help them through, rather than giving them online content. I'm trying to give them gifts. So this week we're delivering a candle and a little prayer card, just trying to give people the things that they need to do their own spiritual disciplines. That's wonderful. I think we're trying to help. We recognised, I think, with lockdown that there is a bias towards consumption, and at any moment a church pastor could cark it, and suddenly the church is left like, what do we now do without the leader? And actually, the leader, we've got to get out of the way and get Jesus in there to everyone's home, because we want that relationship to be tied up with him, not with our particular churches. So we're just trying to do whatever we can to give people the tools that they need to be disciples. I love that, Chris. That's amazing. I really love that. Where can people get copies? Where can people connect with you? Where can people tweet you and that kind of thing? Well, I mean, there is only one Cathy Madavan in the world. So if you Google that, you will find all my social media. And I've got a website, cathymadavan.com. Or actually, because of all my events being cancelled, I always have a lot of stock of books at home this year, that I've bought, which is slightly distressing. So I'm also posting to people direct, which I don't normally do. So they can always message me if they don't want to buy on eden.co.uk. It's a great website for books, better than Amazon for the publisher. But yes, I'm sure if people want to find me, I'm pretty easy to find. Cathy, thank you so much for your time. Love chatting with you. Love your honesty, and really love appreciate hanging out with you, Chris. Always love hanging out with you. Bless you. Thank you. Until next time, grace and peace. Grace and peace.